On paper, America's education is thriving. But behind closed doors, it's a quiet collapse. And it was entirely manufactured. Here's how they did it.
All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a pretty highly charged source script called The Dumbing Down of America. Now, this document makes a really bold claim, basically that the American education system is in a state of systemic decline, and it points the finger directly at some very specific institutions. Now, as always, my goal here isn't to take a side. We're just going to impartially break down exactly what this author is arguing using the data and the claims they present. So, let's get right to it. To set the stage, the source material kicks things off with this stark philosophical quote from the legendary astronomer Carl Sagan. The author uses this to lay out their core premise, that we are witnessing a systematic erosion of critical thinking, historical knowledge, and just basic literacy in our society. And the author suggests this isn't just some accident, a byproduct of smartphones or whatever. They claim it's a deliberate institutional failure. Here's exactly how the text structures this argument. First, we've got the education paradox. Second, the union protection argument. Third, the media narrative. And finally, the cost of ignorance. So starting off with Section 1, the education paradox, examining the illusion of competence. What's really fascinating about this first section of the text is how it highlights this massive, glaring contradiction in the data. Because on paper, American education looks like it's thriving, right? High school graduation rates have hit historic highs, and average student GPAs are steadily climbing up and up. But the source argues that when you look at reality, specifically the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is often called the nation's report card, scores are actually hitting 30-year lows and functional illiteracy is rising. So the script is arguing that while students might be graduating with honors on the surface, their actual math and reading scores are telling a completely different and, frankly, devastating story. To really drive this point home, the source points to a single shocking statistic: 0. According to the hard data presented in the text, in dozens of urban school districts across the country, absolutely 0. Not even a single student is proficient in math for their grade level. The author uses this stark number to emphasize just how massive the proficiency collapse really is in major cities like Baltimore, Chicago, and New York. So you might be wondering, how on earth does this happen? Well, the source claims this whole illusion is maintained through something called grade inflation. The script describes this as lowering academic standards just to maintain school funding and dodge accountability, basically letting students pass without actually being proficient in the material. According to the author, rigorous phonics-based reading and classical logic were just sort of abandoned over the decades. And in their place, the script claims schools brought in these unproven whole language methods and hyper-specialized political curricula, which shifted the whole system toward teaching students what to feel rather than how to think. Which naturally brings us to a huge question. If the system is failing this visibly, why hasn't it been fixed? This is a major pivot in the text, as it transitions to the first big institution the script blames for protecting the status quo. That brings us to Section 2, the Union Protection Argument, prioritizing adult security over student achievement. The text argues pretty forcefully here that major teachers' unions, groups like the NEA and the AFT, actually operate more like political machines than advocates for educational excellence. It points straight at standard union contracts, heavily criticizing strict tenure rules, LIFO policies, and complete bans on merit pay. The crucial takeaway here is that the author firmly believes unions consistently fight accountability. By shutting down merit pay, the script argues that unions stop the system from being able to financially reward the most inspiring, effective teachers in the classroom. Let's look a bit closer at how the source defines that term LIFO, or last in, first out. This is a strict seniority rule, which means that whenever there are budget cuts, the excellent, newly hired young teachers are the ones fired first, while underperforming but tenured staff get protected. The script uses this as its prime example of how the system allegedly prioritizes adult job security over actual student success. And the author definitely doesn't stop there. They frame this as a major conflict. On one side, you have low-income families desperately seeking school choice, vouchers and charter schools so they can escape failing zip codes. But on the other side, the script asserts that major unions use massive political lobbying power to crush those exact alternatives. The source claims that by fighting against things like vouchers and charter schools, unions are actively trapping vulnerable kids in failing schools. According to the text, when schools fail, the union solution is never a structural reform. Instead, it's always just a demand for more taxpayer funding with fewer strings attached. So the author poses this incredibly vital question.
If we have an institutional failure this massive, it should be front-page news every single day, right? So why isn't it? This question shifts our focus to the second major institution the script claims is complicit in all of this.
Section 3, the media narrative, shielding the decline from the public. According to the text, the mainstream media acts as a literal shield for this educational decline. And why? The author points to deep ideological alignments and massive political campaign contributions flowing directly from teachers' unions. The source claims they pull off this cover-up using some very specific tactics. First, they just ignore administrative bloat and union protectionism altogether. Second, they run these softball feature stories that blame the decline on things like systemic underfunding or broader societal factors. Third, they spend airtime framing standardized testing as inherently flawed or outdated. And finally, the text claims they essentially gaslight the public into viewing lowered standards as a form of progress. So instead of sounding the alarm on falling literacy, the source argues the media deliberately hides the root causes to make sure the public stays totally unaware and compliant. Moving to our final section, Section 4, the cost of ignorance, the threat to a free society.
In this part, the script outlines the severe, long-term societal consequences of this unchecked educational decline, and it issues a pretty stark warning. A nation that cannot read its own founding documents, calculate its own taxes, or think critically about the information it consumes cannot remain free. The source concludes that this dumbing down of America isn't just some natural, organic shift in human intelligence. Instead, it's the entirely predictable outcome of an educational system that is totally insulated from accountability by powerful unions, combined with a compliant media that just refuses to hold anyone's feet to the fire. So, what exactly is the author's solution here? Well, to force real structural reform, the text lays out 4 very specific steps for citizens to take. Number 1, refuse to accept the illusion of competence. Number 2, demand real, rigorous academic standards. Number 3, protect and expand school choice. And number 4, look right past the media spin to evaluate the raw data for what it truly is. We're going to leave you with the source's final provocative call to action. Demand standards, support literacy, question the narrative. Based on the raw data we've unpacked in this explainer today, the big question we want to leave you with is this. Are you willing to look past the surface and start questioning the narrative in your own local school district? Thank you so much for joining me for this breakdown. And as always, keep questioning what you read.
Thanks for joining me today as we fight back against media bias. If you would do me a huge favor, like it, subscribe, and join me in the next video.